Welcome to this week's bonus video. It's going to be a bit of a different one today. We're going to look at 10 cards from the EX Ruby and Sapphire through Power Keepers sets that I'd really like to see reprinted. These are cards that may not necessarily do great if they were reprinted right away. Maybe a couple of them at least would need to wait until a few cards rotated. But I think some of these cards would be really interesting to have back in the standard format. And as such, I'd really like to see them back. First, we're going to see the original cards, and then for a few of them at least, we'll kind of look at a refreshed version, or at least refreshed text. So with that said, let's jump into it. I will say this was a suggestion by one of you in the comment section about 4 months ago. Been very, very backlogged with videos, so it took a bit to get this one out, but I did want to do this one. This was a very interesting idea. So thank you, Sirens4562, for the suggestion. Let's jump in. We have up first Desert Ruin. So the original effect was at any time between turns, each player puts 1 damage counter on his or her Pokemon EX with a maximum HP of at least 100. So as long as you had a Pokemon EX that had a decent amount of HP, you were getting pinged by Desert Ruin. So a more modern version of Desert Ruins might look like this. During Pokemon Checkup, put 2 damage counters on each Pokemon with a rule box with a maximum HP of at least 200, both yours and your opponent's. And then Pokemon EX, Pokemon V, etc. have rule boxes. So very interesting effect. I like it. Yeah, I think it would be good for decks that need some extra ping damage here and there. Especially single pricer decks could definitely use something like this. Lost Box, of course, would really like it. So maybe a card like this would maybe need to wait until Sableye rotates, which might be another year from now. But I think a card like this would be very interesting. It'd be very cool to have back in the format. The most recent iteration of something like this we had was Shrine of Punishment. And that card was really, really good and saw a fair bit of play during its era as well. But Desert Ruins, I would welcome back with open arms. Up next, we have Holland Transceiver. So the Holland engine was kind of a whole bunch of different cards that worked together. They had Holland on their name or various things along those lines. So Holland Transceiver often would be a card you'd use to get Holland Mentor, which would help you get set up. Holland Transceiver, in this case, the text is: search your deck for a supporter card that has Holland in its name, show it to your opponent, and put it into your hand. Shuffle your deck afterward, or search your discard pile for a supporter card that has Holland in its name, show it to your opponent, and put it into your hand. So a more modernized version of this, or something that would contextually fit in the current standard format, would be Future Transceiver. I hope you like my my lazy little modernized version there. Future Transceiver says search, in this example, of course, says search your deck for a future supporter card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your deck, or put a future supporter card from your discard pile into your hand. So basically, you get a Versus Seeker for future supporter cards, or you get to search your deck for a future supporter card. The only card currently that would work with would be Turo Scenario, but of course, I do think they're going to put a few more out. There's a card similar to this currently in our format for Single Strike Pokemon, or Single Strike Trainer cards, or other supporter cards. Welcoming Lantern. Didn't really see a whole lot of play. I think it's a little too limited, unfortunately. It's basically just a Versus Seeker for Single Strike supporters, and most of the Single Strike supporters really haven't seen much play. So unfortunately, Welcoming Lantern saw even less play. It is what it is. Welcoming Lantern, I think, was a cool card, but just not good enough. And I think if they, went back to the more Future Transceiver style of things, it would work pretty well and probably be played. And hopefully they print more things that are not Turo Scenario so that it would have some flexibility. Maybe some setup cards. Let's see. Jirachi. So this card is actually really familiar for people who played during the Team Up era. I'm going to go ahead and read it out loud, and then we will admire how much more powerful it was than that one. So Jirachi had the Poke Power Wishing Star once during your turn before your attack. If Jirachi is your active Pokemon, you may look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose one of them, and put them into your hand. Shuffle your deck afterward. Jirachi and your other Pokemon, if there are any, are now asleep. This power can't be used if Jirachi is affected by a special condition. So ignore the whole other active Pokemon thing. This is during an era, the X era, of course, is during an era where they tried to support multi-battles where you had 2 active Pokemon. We're not worried about that. We're going to modernize the ability. We're going to make it an ability as Wishing Star, and we're going to modernize the wording here. So once during your turn, if this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, I should say, is in the active spot. Sorry about that. You may look at the top 5 cards of your deck and put a card you find there into your hand. Then shuffle the other cards back into your deck, and this Pokemon is now asleep. So basically, if the Pokemon's in the active spot, you look at the top 5 cards, pick a card, put it in your hand, and you're good. extraordinarily strong effect, but it does put Jirachi to sleep. The Jirachi during team up had access to a skateboard, which allowed it to retreat even while it was asleep, which is really, really good. Obviously, this Jirachi should never have access to that. It would be way too powerful. But this effect is super strong and would be maybe a pseudo replacement for the whole Lost engine when it rotates. Something like once Comfy's gone, this Jirachi, or one similar to it, or a card similar to it at least, could kind of take over that role and be a pivot Pokemon that lets you dig a little bit, right? I think it's pretty interesting. I think it's very, very strong, of course. And it does put the Pokemon to sleep, so you actually have to run switching cards in order to take good advantage of it. But I do like it. Up next, and this is one of my favorites from the whole era, partly because it's seen some play in Eternal format, which is my alternate format that I've created for basically unlimited, but with a ban list, so that's a sane format to play in. But Surprise Time Machine is a really, really cool card that saw some play in there. Just imagine the version of Gardevoir that in Standard with this card, and then give it a whole bunch more tools to play with, and that's how cool this card is. But let's hear what it even does. All right, I'm actually going to go straight to the modernized wording, because the modernized wording says the same thing. Jump to the modernized wording. Devolve one of your evolved Pokemon by shuffling the highest stage evolution card on it into your deck. If the Pokemon that was devolved in this way is not knocked out, search your deck for a card that evolves from that Pokemon and put it on that Pokemon to evolve it, then shuffle your deck. So basically, you get to take a Pokemon off of an evolution stack, throw it back into the deck, and say, okay, let me find a different one. Or maybe the same one, actually, which is really, really cool, right? So let's say, for example, you had Gardevoir EX in play, and you're like, you know what? I need to get Multiprizer out of play. I don't necessarily want to scoop the whole lineup. It did evolve from Kirlia, so what I can do is I can Surprise Time Machine it. That's a word. I can Surprise Time Machine it, put that Gardevoir EX back in the deck where I don't want it, grab a Gardevoir from Chilling Reign, slap it on there, and now it's ready to go. And it's no longer a Multiprizer, which is very, very cool. The one thing to be aware of, though, is this doesn't magically rare candy your Pokemon. So if you have rare candied your Pokemon, it would pop all the way back down to the basic, and then you'd search for the stage 1. So for example, if you had a Charmander and you had rare candied up into Charizard EX, if you Surprise Time Machined, you would be searching for a Charmeleon, not a Charizard. So do be aware of that. All the same, this card is super, super cool and would see I think I would see a decent amount of play in Standard if there were some evolution lines that could take a good advantage of it. And frankly, it would just lead to some really cool gameplay and really cool deck building. And I'd be very, very happy to see it back. Up next, we have Delcatty. It has the Pokepower Energy Draw. I'm going to read the ability-ified version of it, so the more modernized text. I made it for Farigiraf. I think Farigiraf would be a really cool option for this kind of an ability. So the ability would be Energy Draw. You must discard an energy card from your hand in order to use this ability. Once during your turn, you may draw 3 cards. So discard an energy, draw 3 cards. Very cool. It's very simple. It would be on a stage 1, right? Delcatty is a stage 1. Farigiraf is a stage 1. Just a very cool card, very cool function. Drawing cards is always good. Decks that want to have a lot of energy in play or have a lot of energy in deck in general would appreciate something like this because it gives them some extra draw options. I think it's just awesome. I think it'd be great to have. Up next is Team Aqua's Manectric. It has the Pokepower Power Shift. So the original text for this, I'm going to read this first because this does differ from how I have it more modernized. Once during your turn before your attack, you may move any number of basic energy cards attached to one of your Pokemon with Team Aqua in its name to another of your Pokemon. This power cannot be used if Team Aqua's Manectric is affected by a special condition. So that's true of all Pokepowers. But okay, so basically you're taking all the energy from one of your Team Aqua Pokemon and moving it to another Pokemon. So if you have a bunch of energy piled onto one of your Pokemon that you don't want there anymore, you magically move it over, and now you're good. It is once per turn, and once basically one Pokemon, right? But still very effective and allows you to maybe ditch that Pokemon from play. All right, let's modernize it. We're going to give it to Fluttermane. We're going to make it an EX just to make it super cool. And then we're going to turn it into an ability called Power Shift. Once during your turn, you may move any number of basic energy cards attached to one of your ancient Pokemon to another of your ancient Pokemon. Now, I've restricted a little bit, and I made Fluttermane a 2-prizer, mostly because now it is on a basic Pokemon, so it's a little bit powerful for a basic. Gotta have some trade-off there. But the basic energy cards attached to an ancient Pokemon to another ancient Pokemon. Again, now that restriction exists to only another ancient Pokemon. But that's cool because the new Consadas one Pokemon and then use Flutter Mane to move an energy off there and go on to, say, an active Roaring Moon. So very, very cool. Will we see the effect? Obviously, half these probably will never see any sort of existence in reality. Would I like to see this? Yeah, absolutely, be cool. That's kind of the whole video, right? Would I like to see this? Absolutely, yes, it's cool. Metagross, Delta species Metagross had the Pokepower Delta Control. Once during your turn, before you attack, you may look at the top 4 cards in your deck. Choose one of them and put it into your hand. Put the other 3 cards on the bottom of your deck in any order. And then again, the ability version would be basically the same thing. I gave it to Archaludon. It's a stage 1 instead of a stage 2. So there is that trade-off there, I guess. But I think it would still be fine if it was top 4. Maybe you would drop it to top 3 just to make it a little bit weaker. But, you know, once during your turn, you may look at the top 4 cards of your deck and put one of them into your hand and put the other 3 on the bottom of your deck in any order. So still the same idea, just that kind of churn that would exist. I think it's really cool. It's kind of a stronger version in a way of Airmail. Airmail was kind of like almost a pseudo acrobike where you're looking at 2 cards and putting one on the bottom. This is look at 4 and put 3 on the bottom. So maybe this does belong on a stage 2, or maybe this needs to be a multi-prizer to take advantage of this particular effect. But all the same, I think this is a very cool ability and one I would definitely like to see back in the standard format. Up next, we have Rayquaza EX, the Delta species Rayquaza. It has the Pokebody Rage Aura. If you have more prize cards left than your opponent, ignore all colorless energy necessary to use Rayquaza EX's Special Circuit and Sky High Claws attacks. And then it has Special Circuit, which says choose one of your opponent's Pokemon. This attack does 30 damage to that Pokemon. If you chose a Pokemon that has any Pokepowers or Pokebodies, this attack does 50 damage instead. So you're doing a little bit extra damage if it has a Pokepower or a Pokebody. And then Sky High Claws does 70 damage. Pretty interesting. For 2 energy or 1 energy, those attacks aren't too bad. And then if we modernify it, we are going to turn it into an Iron Thorns because Iron Thorns needs some juicy effects here. We're going to give it the ability Electrical Overdrive. If you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, ignore all colorless energy and the costs of attacks used by this Pokemon. And that gives you actually access to some tools, including TMs, which could be pretty interesting. But we have Special Circuit still, but we've modernized it and we've updated it so that it's a little bit more powerful for the current format. And we said choose one of your opponent's Pokemon. This attack does 60 damage to that Pokemon, and if that Pokemon has an ability, it does 100 instead, and don't apply weakness and resistance for a bunch of Pokemon. And then we gave it Power Beam that does 160 damage, so you would theoretically do that for 2 energy if you're behind on prize cards. I think a card like this would be really, really cool. Maybe if you boosted the Power Beam attack cost and damage, it could be a multi-prizer instead. But all the same, cards effect, very, very cool. And again, I feel like I'm a broken record here. Would really like to see something like this back in the standard format. We do have similar things, right? Radiant Charizard has a similar ability, but I just really like this. And I think it would be really cool to have Iron Thorns. Now, this is a very unique effect that these cards had during the era. There were a bunch of Pokemon like this, Holland's Magneton, Holland's Castform, Holland's Electrode, I believe. Basically, there were like 5 or 6 of them that had an effect very similar to this one. Holland, the evolution Pokemon, I believe, and Holland's Castform all had this particular effect, where basically instead of treating them like a Pokemon, you do this instead. And I'll read it out loud so you can hear it. You may attach this as an energy card from your hand to one of your Pokemon that has an energy attached to it. So it has to have an energy already attached. When you attach this card, return an energy card attached to that Pokemon to your hand. While attached, this card is a special energy card and provides every type of energy, but only 2 energy at a time, and it has no effect other than providing energy. So I would love to see this modernized. Same basic wording, I think. You may attach this as an energy card from your hand to one of your Pokemon that already has an energy attached to it. When you attach this card, return an energy card attached to that Pokemon to your hand. While attached, this card provides every type of energy, provides only 2 energy at a time. So basically, it's a double rainbow, right? You're not having to take a damage when you attach. You're not doing any of that magic. You just bounce the energy from your Pokemon into your hand and then attach Holland's whatever, in that case, to your Pokemon, and you get a double energy out of it. So, and you get the energy back, so you could discard it and Dark Patch it, right? I would really love to see something like this, maybe a future Pokemon or an ancient Pokemon in some way, shape, or form that could act like this. I think it would be better if it were a future Pokemon, just because ancient Pokemon already has some crazy energy acceleration in the form of Sadas. But this is such a cool effect, right? And the fact that you could search it out with something like Ultra Ball just makes it even cooler. So it's like, I need to make this a double energy and I need it to be double energy now. Magic, you have that special energy. And what's even cooler is it's a special energy, but it's not one that Archeops could search out while it's in deck, because in deck, it's not a special energy card. It's only a special energy card when it's attached. So very, very cool. And then the most controversial of all of them, I will say, I think this card probably should wait until Radiant Greninja rotates to become a card again in the format. But let's read this, shall we? We'll read the original version, and then I'll kind of jump to the more modernized version. So Cessation Crystal says, attach Cessation Crystal to one of your Pokemon, excluding Pokemon EX that doesn't already have a Pokemon tool attached to it. If the Pokemon Cessation Crystal is attached to is a Pokemon EX, discard this card. As long as Cessation Crystal is attached to an active Pokemon, each player's Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's, can't use Pokepowers or Pokebodies. So modernized, that becomes, this card can only be attached to a Pokemon that doesn't have a rule box. If this card is attached to anything other than a Pokemon that doesn't have a rule box, discard this card. As long as the Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot, each Pokemon in play in each player's hand and each player's discard pile has no abilities. So basically, this becomes a pseudo Garbotoxin. I think that's awesome. Now, it has to be attached to a Pokemon without a rule box, which does give some favor to decks that either run non-rule box Pokemon or are focused around non-rule box Pokemon. Now, one of the things that's true about this format right now is that we are a very ability heavy. We're more ability heavy in this format than we have been in years, right? We have Bibarel, we have Kirlia, we have Gardevoir, we have all these Pokemon, Squawkabilly, all these Pokemon that have abilities, and everything is reliant on abilities. But something like this would help slow the format even further down, right? Pump the brakes yet again to further slow down the format. I think that would be phenomenal for the format. Something like this, or even something like Garbotoxin, would be a great change and would further enrich the format, right? Right now, we are shifting a little bit more toward a format that has a bit more varied gameplay. Recently, Snorlax Stall has come to the forefront as a non-aggro or non-aggression deck that still seeks to win by basically preventing you from taking knockouts, right? And then by so doing, causing you to deck out. And that's a very cool thing to be able to do, right? You don't necessarily have to win by taking prize cards. In the Pokemon trading card game, you can win other ways, and these other strategies are able to win in ways that are more creative or that are less common, and they force deck builders to be a little bit more conservative, but also a little bit more careful, right? Something like Snorlax makes you go, I either should maybe run some switch cards, or I should run some other counter like Minior, right? And by so doing, decks have to get less greedy. They have to acknowledge the fact that a counter to their turbo exists in the format. And again, I think that's really awesome to see. And a Cessation Crystal would be an excellent modernized version of that has already existed in the past. Now, so I'm going to be just kind of highlight, Pokemon has already, they've already done a lot of cards like this, right? We see Counter Catcher, which in a way is a modernized version of Powhand Extension. And we just saw Pidgeot EX from Obsidian Flames, which was very much a Pidgeot from, it was Fire Red and Leaf Green. These are all cards that are spiritual reprints of cards from the EX era, from this Ruby Sapphire through Power Keepers era. So it is entirely possible that one or more of the cards on this very list could actually become a new card again, whether by the same name or just by the effect. And I'm here for it, right? That would be so cool. But of course, we don't know what the game designers are actually doing. They may decide that they've done enough of the spiritual reprints and are going to start creating some newer, interesting things. But we'll find out. And frankly, I look forward to it. The Scarlet and Violet era has been super cool so far. And yeah, with that, that's it for today. So I'm going to ask the question to all of you as you've watched this video. What card would you most like to see back from the Ruby Sapphire through Power Keepers era? Is it maybe one from this list, or do you have one of your own? let me know in the comments. I will see you in the next video.